The Diary of Detective Lucas Graystone. Chicago, 1960. Part 1. October 12th, 1960. Chicago isn't for the faint of heart. The city breathes in smoke and exhales steam through the cracks in the pavement, its towers like watchful giants, looming over everyone who dares walk its streets. I arrived here only a few weeks ago, and already I can feel its heavy hands shaping me, molding me into something tougher than I used to be. Or maybe I should say, someone different. They say there are layers to every city, but Chicago's layers go deeper, down to some dark, twisted root that most folks don't dare dig up. They keep their heads down, rushing past alleys and under the dim glow of street lamps, as if something unseen is following close behind. And maybe it is. My name's Lucas Graystone, and I'm a detective with the CPD. Fresh on the force, and I know what you're thinking. Sounds like the kind of guy who'd dive headfirst into trouble and still be naive enough to think he can handle it. In truth, I thought I'd seen it all back in Cleveland. A few years on the job taught me to stomach blood, hold my breath against the stench of death, and keep my eyes straight. But nothing back there prepared me for what I'd see in Chicago. I thought I'd keep a diary, some record of my time here. That way, when I get transferred, promoted, or just plain run out of this place, I'll have something to look back on. But what happened last night? Well, that's a memory that might burn itself in without needing ink. October 13th, 1960. The assignment came late in the evening, like a low growl just as I was getting ready to turn in. They didn't give me much to go on, just that I was to meet with Captain Ford and report to a crime scene by the docks. I threw on my overcoat, the weight of my badge pressing against my chest, reminding me of what I'd signed up for. When I arrived, the air was thick with that damp, metallic smell that you get near the river, mingled with something sharper. Captain Ford was waiting under one of those buzzing street lamps, his face hidden in shadow, his expression as grim as I'd ever seen. He didn't say much at first, just pointed toward an alley, his jaw clenched tight. "It's a bad one, Graystone," he muttered. I was no stranger to grisly scenes. I've seen plenty of folks who met their end in alleys, some with bullet holes in them, others left there after some drunken brawl. But when I stepped into that alley, every nerve in my body told me to turn around. My breath caught, and I felt a chill creep up my spine, like the city itself was warning me. There was a body slumped against the wall, partially covered in what looked like a torn trench coat. At first, I thought it was just some poor sap who'd crossed the wrong person. But as I got closer, I saw that his face, if you could call it that, was twisted, frozen in some horrified scream, his eyes wide and bloodshot, staring straight through me. I'd seen fear before, but this was different. His mouth was stretched open, too wide, like someone had forced it. His hands were clawed, as if he'd tried to fight something off. But there were no bruises, no signs of a struggle. And worse, there was this smell, something sickly sweet that clung to the air, making my stomach turn. Captain Ford stood beside me, silent, his face set in a hard line. Finally, he spoke, barely a whisper. "This is the third one in 2 weeks, all like this. No witnesses, no fingerprints, nothing but these expressions." I looked at him, hoping he was pulling my leg, hoping this was some kind of twisted prank, but his eyes were cold and serious. "You're telling me 3 people died like this? With that look on their faces?" He nodded. "Each one found in different parts of the city, but always the same look, the same smell, "Whoa, what's that smell?" I asked, gagging as it hit me again, sharper this time. Ford shook his head. "No idea, but it's like nothing I've ever smelled before." He paused, glancing around like he was afraid someone might hear him. "And there's something else, Graystone. All 3 victims had the same words scratched into the wall beside them." I looked around, searching for whatever he was talking about, and there it was. Right above the man's head, scratched into the brick wall, were the words, "He sees you. October 14th, 1960. The words wouldn't leave my mind. He sees you. It sounded like something out of a kid's nightmare. But what kid could dream up a scene like that? I started digging, going through the files on the other victims, but every lead ran cold. No connections, no enemies, just ordinary folks going about their lives until they wound up dead with their faces frozen in horror. I was back in the station late that night, alone. The dim yellow light of my desk lamp, the only thing keeping the shadows at bay. I was going through the same reports for the 100th time, trying to find some scrap of a clue that might lead us somewhere, when I heard it, a low, dragging sound, like something scraping across the floor. I froze, my pen suspended above the paper. The sound continued, a slow, methodical scrape, like someone dragging something heavy down the hallway. I told myself it was just the janitor, but my gut twisted, every instinct screaming that I was wrong. Slowly, I stood up, the boards creaking beneath my feet as I made my way toward the door. The sound stopped as I reached the hallway, and there was nothing but silence. The light flickered, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. I swallowed, my throat dry, and called out, "Hello?" Nothing, just the soft hum of the flickering light. I shook it off, went back to my desk, and sat down, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But then, as I picked up the report, something caught my eye. In the corner of the page, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 2 words scratched into the paper, like someone had pressed a pencil too hard against it. He sees. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on, every creak and groan of the old building sending my pulse racing. I was a detective. I'd seen things most folks would run from. But this was different. This wasn't some thug or gangster lurking in the shadows. It felt like the shadows themselves were watching me, waiting. October 15th, 1960. I had to keep looking. Something in me refused to let it go, as if those words had burrowed into my mind, whispering to me, pulling me deeper into something I couldn't understand. I started asking around, talking to old-timers who'd been in the city longer than I'd been alive. Most of them just gave me strange looks, shrugged me off, told me I was wasting my time. But then I met a man named Jacob, a janitor who'd worked down by the docks for over 30 years. His eyes were sharp, watchful, the kind that had seen more than most people would ever want to know. When I told him about the bodies, the words on the wall, he went pale. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. They used to tell stories about something like that. Back when I was a kid, some folks said there was a thing, something that came up from the lake, something that watched people, followed them. They'd see it, just a glimpse out of the corner of their eye, a shadow that didn't quite fit. He glanced around, as if afraid something might overhear. They said if you saw it, if you felt it watching you, then it was too late. I wanted to laugh, tell him he was crazy, but his eyes held this haunted look, a fear that went bone deep, and something in me knew he was telling the truth, even if I couldn't explain it. I thanked him and walked away, his words echoing in my head. A shadow that didn't quite fit. Something watching from the darkness.